Keith Smith, in the last few minutes, there's been a mention about land ownership and land tenure, about housing, apart from everything about the soil. And at the end of David's talk, there was, a plea for internationally, sort of ending deforestation. Can I suggest that some of these things can be integrated a bit, that we are being too narrow in thinking about the soil below vegetation rather than thinking about land use. We are, I believe, as I understand it, as of lunchtime, we're still in the EU. I think we're the second least forested country, and the other side of the big debate of this week is Ireland, which is even less forest cover. In small islands like the British Isles, therefore, it seems to me that the practical issue ought to be what within the broader sphere of soils and land use, agriculture, forestry, and every other sort of land use, what is likely to be the greatest positive contributor to this idea of carbon sequestration. And I want to know if anybody is aware of detailed quantitative modelling that shows it, that if one were to enforce reforestation of a large part of our supposed so-called sort of natural land, the uplands that are used for entirely unproductive bird shooting, if we had a controlled forestry policy that it wasn't merely just to produce cheap timber for making plywood, but it was part of an organised programme of use of that in domestic, residential and other forms of construction because of the sequestration of that carbon for 100 years in a well-made modern building. There's prejudice against wooden buildings in this country, which is ridiculous when looked at from many other parts of the developed world, where it's absolutely the norm. You only have to see any construction site in the whole of North America with people hammer and nails and 4x2 construction to know that that is the norm for residential construction. But what I'm getting at is that there is a sterilisation of land as a result of the big landowners who simply operate it for grouse shooting. I think we're well aware, most people are, of the sort of classic experiments that have been done where even what appears to be a bit of bleak Welsh or Scottish hillside, where exclusion experiments have been done, and you stop the sheep grazing, you get that recreation of mixed woodland of rowans and ashes and or as well as conifers and all sorts growing back. And we know that where systematic reforestation has been done, then even up to 300 or 400 meters, we're getting very large production. The rate of growth is, because of our mild climate, is exceeded only in places like New Zealand, where they're growing Monterey pines. And I just believe that the percentage of land that one needs to be used more systematically in that way to get our 10% or whatever it is forest cover up to 12 or 15 would dramatically increase the amount of carbon sequestration compared with adding a little bit to all the arable land. We want, I think, to stabilise that, but Bridget's figures showing that inexorable small decline means that simply to get it flat again, it may be the sort of target that we can go for. And I think the political and scientific focus ought to be in this other direction.
I'm sure Joe wants to do something about the conservation line as well. I think there's a lot to be said for what you're saying, and it would come back to your urban question, that I think if we start linking the forestry with the houses, on land, and really think about things, and it is that Wales is already going that, where a lot is, we've just, and a lot of the building in Wales is now using wood. And I think there's real opportunities there. But there's a lot of discussions to happen, because the conservationists is some of the last land that they have in terms of conservation land. So we've got food, we've got fibre, and we've got conservation. And I think, just pulling that together is going to be some really hard debates with people coming together in rooms to actually work out for which bit of land what to do. But I personally agree as well that trees are part of the solution here. But just to say, you asked whether someone's done the modelling. So the ACOS model has now got in the forestry research model a module called Scotia to look at the effects of trees and soil carbon. And one of the kind of embarrassing things as a community is we still do not have a good evidence base of what trees do to soil carbon on the rich types of soil. We can't agree, and the data isn't there. So we have an extraordinary lack of data for some of the major land use types in soil carbon. Grazing, it isn't linear, actually goes up and then it goes down. Forestry, we cannot, the data, if you look at impacts of trees, you can have anything from negative to positive, other than on arable. That's the only time it always goes positive. So we are in an embarrassing situation. We're now trying to advise government on, we've got fantastic molecular data, what have you, and we can't answer really basic questions about where will trees increase soil carbon and where will they, because they use more water, lose it. The trees are, I know.
It's what you carted off and used and sequestered in that way.
In the trees,
I agree. A much bigger number.
I agree, but people do end up asking about the soil carbon as well, and all I'm saying is that it's an embarrassing hole in our research ideas at the moment. We don't have the data. But yes, Pete Smith has had a go, and there is a model to try and do it.
Elena wants to comment back there.
Here we go.
Yes.
It's Elena Vangelova. I'm for Forest Research, Forestry Commission. So I just want to, get into the debate about forestry. My first kind of answer to all the 4permil, it will be plant more trees. And plant them on our low carbon soils, of course, but we don't have that kind of land because that land is used for food. And just in response to say that, yes, the government's got an initiative to a forest and to increase the forest land. And, for example, I've got some figures saying by 2060 we just need to increase the forestation in England with 2%, in Scotland with 7%, and the land cover, and Wales is 3.5%. So these are also very ambitious initiatives because we're also looking for land to plant. And, of course, is the upland, is the highly organic land available for planting? And luckily, because of these questions and because of what also Bridget shows, the big variability in organic soils or mineral soils, we've got quite a lot of money so far from Scottish Government particularly to look at impacts of forestry on mineral soils and organic soils. And just to say that also our policies, our kind of internal policies and guidance are preventing actually now afforestation on peatlands. So we are, from now on, we are not planting any more forestry on deep pits, so that's actually improvement of carbon in the future. We are still, though, going to plant on organomineral soils because these are the available lands to plant. And recent studies are coming along from our research that of course, when you plant forestry, you degrade the land, you drain it and so on. You've got a very big dip in the organic matter content and the shrinkage of the pit and so on. But if you plant more than one rotation forestry, like from conifer perspective or from, you will come up to a balance at the end. So that actually loss will be balanced in about 100 years of 2 rotations. And actually, if you move more into the broadleaf and more of a mixed stance and forestry, then you'll be really be more stabilizing soil carbon in terms of if you plant it on a more mineral component of the soil. So yeah, we're doing quite a lot of research to try and unravel these questions, but the problem is the variability in the soils. This is it. It's just very difficult to get that error bar down in the organomineral soils to be able to determine significance in terms of the results of planting forestry and what that means to organic soils or organomineral soils carbon. Otherwise, we know the figures for mineral soil. Yeah. Yes, it is so positive, as we've been shown by David, but long-term Rothamsted experiments, and we've got quite long-term chronosequence experiments to say the same actually rate of increase what you've just shown. So it's a positive increase in mineral soils, but not in organomineral soils. But you need to plan for long.
We have question over there, another one over there.
One thing that I've been noticing throughout all the talks here is that we have, like it goes back to what Bridget was saying, was that with that terrible response to government of people saying, everything's just too diverse, and you look at soils are too diverse, and you look at the amount of carbon input that would need for England and Wales is a really large number, and for Scotland it's pretty much unreasonably large. So one thing that just sort of struck me was, and I wanted to get your guys' opinion on this, is do you think that not just devolution amongst the home nations, but devolution to more of a even sub-national scale, to the more the county level type stuff? I know that some like autonomous regions and corporations and stuff send delegates to places like COP21 and COP23, and they say, we're going to come back and take these initiatives. We can't necessarily sign on as a dignitary, but we can take all the info and input it ourselves. And I was just wondering if, looking at some place like, the sort of bread baskets in England where all the arable land is, those statistics are going to be way different for 4permil than they are in the Scottish Highlands and the Welsh Mountains and the coastal regions all across there. So I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on sort of regional as opposed to national.
I think that's a really very sensible suggestion. I mean, it's certainly, we're actually very bad in this country, I don't know about other European countries, at planning our land use. In fact, Johann Baumer at Wageningen once said that in Europe, we actually do not do land use planning. We do land use negotiation, usually at local level. We'll grow houses here and not there, that sort of thing. But actually, we don't plan our land use. It's really only been in sort of communist countries where that's happened, not necessarily with good results. So I think at least doing modelling, if that's the word, to say, well, scenarios, if you like. If we grew more trees here or did something different there, these will be some outcomes, would be a very sensible thing to do. Then those results can be put before policymakers, whether they're national or indeed more local, would make a lot of sense, yeah. I think we should be bolder in putting forward that sort of planning or scenarios, if you like. Then we as society can make choices about them.
Thanks very much. David Robinson, Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. I think this follows on from what Elena was saying. We've heard quite a lot about mineral soils and organic soils, but based on the data that Bridget presented for Wales, is the understanding of carbon retention and loss in organomineral soils, which perhaps cover, 20 to 30% of the UK, the next big scientific challenge?
Yes. I think quickly. But I think that's been a challenge for a few decades, at least the last 10 to 20 years. It's been something people have been discussing at meetings like this, and yet no progress, or less progress. I think your monitoring is starting to show some progress on that, but I'd say yes.
I mean, can I comment? I mean, certainly the very high organic matter peat soils behave differently and have to be modelled in a different way to more mineral soils. But if you like, the ones in between, I'm not aware that the main models, your Century, your DNDC, your Rothsea, do such a bad job with those soils, but I may be wrong. I stand to be corrected.
I think one of the problems is they don't grow the organic matter, and even in those organic mineral soils, they might not be peat, but if you dig them up, you can still see layers that the organic material, even though it's drained, it's still accumulated. It's like a chocolate brownie, you can cut it up. So, and I think that is the biggest problem, or the challenge, if you like, with the soil carbon modelling, is actually how to capture this layered growth.
But the Century model does layers. In fact, there's a version of Rothsea does as well. I can't see why it's such a big problem.
Does it grow? Does it grow the layers? They have pools. And you have layers where parameters change, but the soil doesn't year on year accumulate.
Okay.
And that is the biggest conceptual difference between the two.
And I think when they've just been tested, which Pete's done with the COS and other ones, we always end up having to parameterize according to what the changes have been. So we always ended up having to do that. If you go and talk to the land atmosphere modelling community, they can't believe we call that modelling. To them, you don't get to play and parameterize and turn knobs to make it fit. That isn't fundamental modelling. They set joules and they run it. The fact that we do not have any soil carbon, we can get it to fit, David. Honestly, we can. If you could build enough knobs into any model, you can get anything to fit. It's getting the fundamental understanding such that we can run without doing that calibration that I think is the key. And whether with all the the paradigm shifts that the Schmidt paper in Nature suggested that we need to move away from the organic matter chemical controls in our models. There's a lot of things that are fundamentally mismatched between how most of our traditional models, they've been great. No one's saying, but we've now come to a fundamental shift into our soil understanding, and whether we need the next generation of models so that we can really move forward is a question that I think I'm not, Pete Smith himself has, the Climate Smart paper said we need a basket of models that can really challenge each other, just like the GCMs can, that really capture this new understanding of how soils work. So.
But picking up on that, I'd say that impedance, chemical recalcitrance does protect organic matter. So, and again, because you don't have the earthworms, you don't have aggregates forming, it's a different soil, and actually it's water and chemistry that protect.
I think what we've got is we've got biology, we've got chemistry, and we've got physics, and we just perhaps haven't got that balance right in our models. We need to re-get that balance, perhaps a little bit away from chemistry in some soils, but for peats it's perhaps more about hydrology and the chemistry. We just need to rethink that, and various people are trying. There's actually a whole explosion of new approaches to soil modelling going on in the literature if you have a read now, which is really exciting, I think, for the next generation that I see before me. So do have a look at those, because I think they're going to be, just in 10 years' time, we're going to have a whole nother set of models in our toolbox.
Okay, thank you, Bridget. We have two last comments, one over there and one over there.
Thank you. Your question and the responses to your question highlight precisely why I think we need to be much more specific about how we treat soils. If you go again to Wales, there are three types of soils which are in what you describe as the organomineral bracket. Peaty groundwater clay soils where they have a fluctuating groundwater table which comes up in the winter right to the surface and then drops down unless it's drained. Surface water glaze, which again are wet because the water can't get through an impermeable subsoil, behave very differently. But the really vulnerable group, I think, are the stagnant podsoils, where you've got a thin peaty layer which is there because the rainfall is high, and there's about a 5 centimetre thick layer beneath it which is holding the water in the peaty layer. As soon as those dry and start cracking, the water is through into a permeable substrate, and they will behave very, very differently. Bracken will get into them, which whilst they're wet, it won't go into them. And as soon as the bracken's in, it breaks the whole thing up, and all the carbon is lost within a few years. And that might explain partly why you've got the results you've got. But we have to be more specific about how we describe and treat soils.
Okay. Can I ask a question to the audience? What about biochar? No one's mentioned that yet. Biochar. Nobody's mentioned it yet. I thought we'd have a massive debate about biochar.
I thought we were asking the panel questions.
I was going to say what about biochar, but I couldn't get a question in edgeways. So I did my PhD in. I was afraid of getting shot down in flames, no pun intended. The usual response is where we're going to get all the feedstock. And that is always the biggest issue with biochar. Nevertheless, there is always feedstock around somewhere, and some of it isn't disposed of in very sensible ways. And if we grew more trees, of course, you'd get clippings and prunings. But I think the powerful thing about biochar is that it raises carbon more dramatically than any other method. And there's a lot of research gone into that, and the recalcitrance is so much longer. So I think, the potential is limited, but I think the effects are powerful.
Can I comment on biochar? Yeah. I feel with biochar, it itself is fairly is pretty recalcitrant. Okay, some people have challenged that a bit, but on the whole, it seems to be. But the question is, why add it to soil? I think. Some people have said if we're using biochar just because it is very recalcitrant, you don't need to add it to soil. You can put it in a big heap somewhere. If, on the other hand, that's sort of serious. Really. But if there were evidence that putting the biochar in soil, it conferred stability to other parts of the organic matter by sorption or whatever, then that would be really big news. Now, I've not yet seen clear evidence of that. Maybe Sharon can update us on that, but that will be my reason for wanting to add biochar to soil, if it did that.
Can I follow up with a second question then, on that note? So we used to burn our stubble a few decades ago, and we stopped because of the air quality problems. But so farmers were making biochar in their fields.
No, biochar is pyrolysis, it's combustion.
Okay, they were burning, they were creating some types of ash. And ash, okay, they were creating ash. And then we've also seen decline in arable stocks. Is there any correlation between those two things? How stable was the stubble? There's a question I've been asked by farmers, whether actually the cessation of stubble burning might have contributed.
Very little
carbon was going in the atmosphere.
Yeah, but they were making ash as well.
Very little carbon remained in the ash.
Okay.
Essentially mineral.
Yeah.
When you do combustion in the open air, the carbon goes in the atmosphere, so the balance is really poor. Yeah. So it's not That's the main difference.
It was just
biochar is pyrolysis.
Yeah, okay.
Keep most of the
I was doing some sort of mental arithmetic sort of in the background. It took me some time. But I was thinking, of this global organic carbon stock, 10% is thought to be pyrogenic in origin. So about 10% of this global stock is charcoal, effectively, or you could call it biochar. And I suppose if we, the 4permil, now I know the origins of the number, that's based on cancelling out total carbon emissions to air, isn't it, from fossil fuel burning. So we don't need one technology, we need a lot of technologies to cancel that out. But if we just focused on 1/10 of that, one of the wedges, as it were, then, why don't we focus on increasing the global stock of pyrogenic carbon by 4permil? Because that actually comes to exactly the same number that Dominic Wolf put out as a sustainable technical potential of biochar of 1 gigaton per year.
Okay, well, we'll just change the focus a bit. I wanted to sort of pick up on a point. Are there any questions? I don't want to stop people in the audience. Sorry. I can't see who's got the mics and things.
So sort of touching on what was just said, I was wondering about what the panel's opinion was of actually what makes up that 4permil in the total organic carbon in soils can be broken down into its various components, in particular microbial carbon.
Well, maybe I could jump in on that. I might go off at a bit of a tangent. On average, the carbon within the living cells in a soil, what I would call the microbial biomass, is of the order of 2 to 4% of total carbon in soil, depending whether you're arable, woodland, or whatever. So you've got that. That's a very small amount, but obviously a very important amount. And in fact, I would perhaps just use that as a springboard to mention something which Henry Jensen, a very wise soil scientist in Canada, has often said, is that it's not so much the total stock of carbon in soil that's important for soil quality, if you like, but it's the flow of carbon through soil. And so he makes the point that if you add some organic matter, whatever it is, to soil, it's processed by those small amount of microbes, and that helps all the biology in one way or another. Then let's say they produce polysaccharides or whatever, that has an effect on aggregate stability, etc., etc., etc. Now, of that carbon that you've added, we know that experiments show that about 2/3 typically will be gone as CO2 within 1 year in temperate regions. But anyway, a lot of it will have disappeared, and only quite a third of it or whatever left in the soil. So Jensen's point would be that it's the flow of carbon through the soil that's important, not for sequestration, but for carbon for soil quality, if you like. And he had a wonderful paper many years ago that said soil carbon, should we hoard it or use it? I did have a slide, but I knew I had too many. I chucked it out yesterday. So that's a little.
Affecting that flow, that could then potentially shift some of that carbon flow into sequestration.
Yeah, a little.
Yes, of course. And there is increasing evidence that the carbon that is stabilized for decades and centuries, much of it is microbial, of microbial origin. Yeah. So it's not alive, but it's of microbial origin.
Nearly all the carbon in soil is probably microbial origin.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
Henry's analysis of it regards soil organic matter rather like a river. And I think the river analogy is very useful. If it rains in the headlands, the river rises and the flow increases. It's not a case of it just going faster. You get both effects if you put more in. Yes. And I think holding on to that river analogy is rather useful here. And I just want to add a comment to Joe's remark about burning stubble. It's really good for controlling blackgrass.
Yeah, there we go. It's just something that farmers ask about, Actually, it's I just wanted to put the question out there. But yeah, blackgrass is also a problem.
Andy Tweedy, I'm a PhD student. Just coming off of that, we've spoken, obviously we're here to talk about carbon, but there's all the other nutrients as well. And when you're storing organic matter, you're not just storing the carbon. Do you think you'd be creating other issues for other nutrient limitation, or conversely would other nutrients limit the amount of carbon that you can store?
I can comment on that. I mean, traditionally, it's been a sort of case that if you, let's say, incorporate cereal straw into a soil, that locks up a certain amount of nitrogen. And so in sort of farming, circuits often say that you need to add a bit more fertiliser. Now, whether that's totally true or not, I'm not sure, because in many agricultural situations, you've usually got more nitrogen sloshing around than you want. So locking some up is actually rather good, because you probably get less nitrate leaching. So there's pros and cons. I'm an author of a small comment paper that was slightly critical of the 4permil, that said you've actually got to have nitrogen, and you need phosphorus, to go with that carbon if you're aiming to lock up a lot of carbon. And I think in some situations, you'll have plenty of nitrogen. It'd be a very good thing to lock up nitrogen. In others, I don't think you will. So I think you've got both extremes there.
So it's down to the sort of local conditions?
I think so. That'd be my feeling.
Has to be spatially differentiated. I like very much this expression in this paper. Yes, organic matter storage and sequestration have to be spatially differentiated.
Yeah, we debated that a little. Yeah.
It's Keith again, sorry.
Problem will be getting the organic material to add to the soils, because for some farmers it's just impossible to get hold of, for example, farmyard manure, maybe compost available, but it's going to be difficult to get the materials to apply.
Okay, so this was some discussion in some of the talks as well, so I wanted to kind of pick up on this, where are we going to get it from, but also one of David's comments of sequestration versus moving it from one place to another as well, which is tied up with the amendments question. So I wonder whether I could open up that question to the panel about whether it's achievable using the arsenal that we have available to us to actually increase.
I think regarding manure, yes, I think we both said it, that the possibility to improve carbon sequestration from adding manure in our countries, there's not much more to do, because it's already been applied. So moving it, putting it one place or another doesn't make any change. And there was, this reminds me that there were debates about organic agriculture. Indeed, organic farms, quite often their soils are higher in soil organic matter and organic carbon content than others, but it's importing the organic resources from elsewhere. So at the scale of the landscape, doesn't make a difference. So there is potentially urban wastes. So it might not be, I don't know estimates in many countries. I know that in France it has been estimated that if we were to sort and compost more of our organic wastes, we could increase tremendously the amount of compost added to soil. And this is a new resource, and otherwise it's burned. So there's really an advantage. Compared to, for my country, compared to the amount of manure that is added to soil, it's very small. It would be 10% of what is added as manure. But, that's a new resource.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Again, using sort of waste from urban sources, or even sort of food processing, that at the moment, some of it, I believe, goes to landfill. Diverting that would be a good thing, but I don't have a feel for the quantities. I'm sure there are people in this room who know better than I would about that.
It was just to say, or farmers can grow their own by doing these more mixed systems, just by doing more rotational, getting some grass, and the kind that David was talking about. And so instead of always thinking, can we just do more mixed systems, might be the other approach, but urban is the other comment. Yeah.
So this is what I said, increased primary productivity is the first lever. Yeah, so
absolutely.
Crops, etc.
And also to rethink our stocking densities as well. Not just on grazing, but also in dairy, because we got rid of milk quotas a few years ago, and our dairy herd has expanded massively. And obviously they're creating issues. So I think there are things we need to look at in terms of stocking density, in terms of actually helping that litter fall onto the ground.